Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today on privacy in the age of AI. If you didn't see the announcement last week, WorldCoin recently announced the pilot of a new security technology called Face Auth and also shared a new privacy white paper entitled Private by Design. So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about how WorldCoin project in general is approaching privacy and the opportunities and challenges that emerge in a world where AI is becoming more and more prevalent every day. So we'll start the conversation by talking about what is the age of AI? What do we mean by that? And what impact do we see in people's lives with that? From there, we'll transition and talk about how WorldCoin is putting privacy, anonymity, and security at the center of everything it does. And then we'll dive in and spend a good bit of time talking about Face Auth, this new feature that I mentioned. Now, before we go any further, as always, we want to do a round of intros. We've got a great group again today. Some of them, I think, may be their first space they've done with us here. But anyway, I'll kick things off. I'm Stephen Smith. I'm the head of protocol at Tools for Humanity. Tools for Humanity is a key contributor to the WorldCoin project. The protocol is pretty much everything related to blockchain, crypto, and some research areas that we focus on. And with that, I'll pass it over to Marcin, who I believe is in the space. So Marcin, do you want to give us a brief intro? Tell us what you do.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcin Czarnecki, and I'm Chief Privacy Counsel and DPO for the Worldcoin Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization that is the steward of the Worldcoin protocol.
All right, very good. And let's see, Damien, I think you're on.
Hey, Stephen. Hey, folks. Damien. I am the Chief Privacy Officer and lead the legal team at Tools for Humanity, which is one of the core contributors to the Worldcoin project.
All right, very good. Glad to have you. I think it is your first space we've done together anyway. And Chris,
my first space ever, Stephen, is my first space ever. And I worked at Twitter for 7 years, so this is going to be interesting.
Okay, no, that's unexpected, honestly. So I thought you'd probably done a few of these. But anyway, we just have a simple conversation. So that's all we do. But glad to have you. Chris, are you on?
Yes, so my name is Chris, and I'm the head of AI and biometrics here at Tools for Humanity. And as the name suggests, me and my team, we are responsible for developing secure and accurate biometric solutions for the WorldCoin project.
All right, excellent. And Adrian, is Adrian in?
Hey, Stephen. Yeah, I got it. I got it working. What's the phrase? Long-time listener, first-time speaker. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, so head of security for Tools for Humanity, and work with all of the other lovely folks that you've mentioned.
All right, excellent. So, I mean, we have like an incredible group of speakers to talk about everything we're going to talk about today. Face Auth, Chris and his team were directly responsible for working on that, along with a few other groups at TFH and Worldcoin Foundation. And then we've got the Data Protection Officer at the Foundation and Chief Privacy Officer here, Adrian's Chief Information Security Officer. So we've got just a great crew on space. Before we kick things off, just quick, a little bit of housekeeping. We always try to save a bit of time at the end of the space for audience questions. So if there's anything that you have a question about, feel free to drop it in the Twitter thread, and we'll do our best to get to those toward the end of the space. So let's jump right in. At first, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the age of AI. And so we'll start by talking about, I mentioned the privacy in the age of AI as the title of the space. So we're going to talk about the second half, the age of AI, and what that means. So Marcin, we'll start with you. And I'd love for you to give us a big picture. Like, what do we mean when we say the age of AI? Just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, sure. So I think that the first thing we should define AI. And while there are multiple definitions, I think that in simple terms, AI is about machines being able to simulate how humans think and behave. And while for many years AI was mainly present in science fiction books and movies and among small circle of scientists, in recent years, it started being part of our lives and having application in those lives, whether we are aware of it or not. So you can find examples of AI-driven technology in personal assistant, translators, in cars that you drive. You benefit from it in research on healthcare, in education. So it's basically everywhere, and sometimes it's not easily visible. Even if you look at the biggest tech news and announcements in the last days, they all bear the AI sign on them. Whether it's Apple AI, whether it's OpenAI's O1, which is a sophisticated reasoning model, or whether it's Meta's AI-powered video avatar, which allows to communicate with AI using voice, and you can see real people or like imitations of real people speaking. So all of that is what is basically age of AI. It's everywhere.
All right, very good. Excellent description, by the way. So, Chris, Adrian, Damien, anything you want to add, like perspective on age of AI and what we mean to that to help get people to level set?
I think the only thing I'd maybe add is that I think like we're all at the start of this journey in terms of what AI is going to do and how it's going to impact our lives. And so I think for me, when I think about the age of AI, what I think about is like this amazing potential that is going to happen for humanity. And it's like all of the things that will unlock. And most of us probably can't even imagine what that actually looks like in 5, 10, 15 years. So it's like the age of AI is like this opening of a door to a new world and a new era.
Okay, very good. Chris or Adrian, anything to add? Not to put you on the spot. We like to have these more like a conversation anyway. But
Yeah. I'll jump in. I thought that the observation that Marcin made around how we think about AI is important. I've been talking about AI for 20 years, right? I was at Google previously, et cetera. And most of the applications that we've seen so far are very narrow use cases, right? Solve a particular vision problem, solve a particular this problem. And all of those fall under AI. But where we're interested in it is where it's confusing about whether the thing you're interacting with is a person or not. And so we actually have a very narrow set of use cases related to AI that are interesting for the problem that we're trying to solve. So I just want to flag that when we're talking about the world of AI, it's not all of the tiny little specific problems like better vision or generation of a specific type of image or those kinds of use cases, but it's how it all comes together and how it gets confusing to tell whether something is being generated by a machine or whether it's being generated by a person.
Okay, excellent observation. I'll just add one thing, then we'll move on to talk about privacy. Sam had I saw a quote from Sam at one point that said essentially that people talk about AI, superhuman intelligence and things of that nature, but that AI would reach the level of superhuman influence before it reached the level of superhuman intelligence, which I think is to your point, Adrian. When you're interacting online, being able to tell that you're interacting with a human versus potentially a bot or some automated process backed by some level of AI is super important. So, okay, so let's shift gears. We'll move to privacy now. And here we want to talk about what implications AI has on personal privacy, how the Worldcoin Foundation, TFH, approach it. And yeah, so we'll start there and let the conversation go where it goes. Damien, let's start with you. We mentioned the new white paper that came out. I know you were key on that and Adrian was key on that. So yeah, let's talk about the kind of the 4 principles of privacy.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think maybe as a segue into that, I think it's probably useful to set a little bit of context. And I think it builds off of what Adrian was saying about the problem that we're trying to solve for. And I think this is particularly interesting to privacy, folks that work in the privacy field, which is that as AI expands and you want to tell the difference between a human and a computer in digital transactions, the de facto way to do that over the last 5 to 10 years has been ask for more information. So I asked Marcin or Adrian or Chris, give me your date of birth. I asked them to give me a photo of their government issued ID. I asked them, answer these 3 personal questions about yourself. And what's fascinating about that is in a world where if we're using data to build models and feed AI to make it more intelligent, what you're actually doing is you're providing the very information that would be required to deep fake you in an AI world. And so there's no shortage of irony in the fact that that the solution to solving, at least to date, to solving this question of a human and a bot has been asked for more information. So it's the least privacy friendly thing that you can do, right? And I think that leads us full bore to how we're thinking about the problem and how we think about privacy and the importance of it in the age of AI. And so what we want to figure out is how do we answer that question of the problem of distinguishing between a human and a computer in digital interactions and do it in a way that respects and ensures privacy in anonymous ways. And so the white paper that we launched last week or published last week focuses on our core sort of 4 privacy principles, as it were. And none of these are earth-shattering, right? But it's just how we think about these things. So the first is security. And so obviously without security, you can't have privacy. And obviously Adrian can speak to this in depth. But I mean, it goes without saying that without having core security primitives, core security programs, and designing technology in certain ways, you just can't deliver on privacy promises. So that's the first of our sort of principles. The second is anonymity. And anonymity is incredibly important because it actually drives a bunch of the technical innovations that we're using to deliver on our product and services. Getting into the weeds a little bit, like how we deliver on anonymity is basically when you verify a World ID, meaning when you go to one of our advanced cameras, the orbs, we generate an iris code, which is an abstraction of your iris in a binary code. But then to store that in a way that ensures that nobody can identify you, what we do is we use a process called secure multi-party computation, which is a cryptographic sort of security protocol to break up that binary code and store it in a secure way. And that seeks to render the data anonymized. And the goal of that is to ensure privacy in this AI world. But that idea of anonymity feeds into everything that we're doing in this space. So the next one of our principles is choice and control. Again, lots of companies think about choice and control and projects think about choice and control when it comes to privacy. But how that works for us is we think about how do we collect the bare minimum of data? So like when you download the World app, for example, we don't ask you for your name, we don't ask you for your email address, we don't ask you for your phone number. And we seek to collect and know as little about you as we can, because that way it ensures that you have choice and control over what you're doing on that, when you use World ID. We also do provide a variety of controls over the data that you do share when you use the World app. And so the goal is to make those more transparent and more control for users. And the last thing is transparency. So obviously everything we've done, we've tried to open source pretty much everything. And the reason for doing that is so that people can verify what we're doing. They can test it, they can audit it. And also it allows people to develop with a certain amount of security or faith and belief in what we're doing and trust. And so that's obviously the goal of being transparent about how we operate, how we build things, and how we think about going to the future. I suppose the last note before I kind of kick it over to the guys to share their observations is that I think this stuff is incredibly complicated to get right. Like we're talking about like trying to do things with types of data that people typically would find very scary from a privacy perspective. Like when people think biometric data, immediately alarm bells ring, right? And that's why it's so incredibly important to be using the technologies that we use, like secure multi-party computation or zero-knowledge proofs, which Adrian will talk a bit about, I'm sure. But key to that is for people, like whether it's in this space or elsewhere, to be able to talk to us and to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, Adrian, you want to add anything in there?
I do, actually. One thing in specific that jumped out at me. I'm regularly surprised at how little people care about privacy. And I'm a security person, so I care about it and think about it every day. And I'm sure Damien's in the same boat. Your description of how the problem we have with AI is that as it learns more about you, it becomes better at emulating you and faking you, and how that makes privacy critical as part of the way we defend against AI being able to be abusive is super interesting. And I think that's the first time I've heard that articulated so cleanly. So I thought that was really helpful. It's not just about privacy because you care about privacy. It's privacy because the approach we're using right now to fight AI makes the AI better at fighting us. And that's the core problem. And that's why privacy enhancing technologies are so critical for us to be successful in enabling humanity to succeed on the internet as there's more and more AI that's out there. So that was a really interesting articulation. Thanks, Damien.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Stephen, if I can add to that, because I think it's like, look, to me, I'm smiling, which people folks can't obviously see, but like here we are on Twitter, or X, place I formerly worked at, which is probably part of the reason I came to this project, right? Twitter was, I think, in a Web 2.0 world, the best example of the problems of not being able to distinguish between a computer and a human in an online world. And so the bot problem is obviously notorious, right? And so we used to, at least back in the day, remove anywhere between 2 and 3 million accounts a week because they were bots. And solving that problem is like whack-a-mole with traditional or current infrastructure. Add AI onto that, and it just gets worse. And so then we have this interesting problem here where like, and I see some folks from the privacy community on here who are listening, but like, I certainly won't single anybody out, but if one of them is challenged by Twitter to prove who they are, they will have to share more information with Twitter. Twitter developed AI technology. That AI or that data is then used to train those models. And sort of you have this like, just this snowball effect of challenges. And so there has to be a better way to solve these problems, and it can't be sharing more data.
Well, and today the only approach is move to a higher bandwidth channel, right? So
yeah, right.
The delightful thing about Twitter was that the messages are short, but that also means that it's relatively easy to make a fake one that is convincing. So you move to audio, and then you move to video. And I think we're at a point now where on all of those channels, it's relatively easy to fake a person.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Before we move on from this section, I want to bring Marcin in. And so we talk about the age of AI and core tenets of privacy. How does this relate to the creation of the Worldcoin project? Let's just go back to the very basics here.
Yeah, so we were talking about age of AI and its definitions, and there's another side of it, which Damien briefly said, that now there are also risks that are scaling with bots, identity theft, disinformation, and because it's more difficult to tell the difference between humans and bots, these risks are real. And that's the reason why the Worldcoin project was created, actually, to create a digital proof of personhood where one can confirm that they're human online. So this is the why the project is there. And as Damien and Adrian say, the how is equally important, right? So that we preserve privacy. And one thing to add is so that people not always think about privacy. And I think that this is also another thing that differentiates us from other organizations, where, as you will see on our white paper, which is private by design, we don't require users to do anything. This data we're doing everything we can to make this data private, anonymous, and secure, right? Whereas in other organizations, you might frequently find tools which you need to toggle and go there and spend time to actually have privacy settings.
So that's good. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's definitely a great background on the project and the challenges and opportunities, right? And we're going to shift to, you mentioned the how, and we're going to shift into the how now. We're going to talk a little bit about how we do some of those things. But I just did want to throw out a quick Q&A reminder. If you have any questions as they come up through the space, just put those in the Twitter thread. And I have a hard time saying X for some reason. Put them in the Twitter thread and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so let's shift into the how a little bit now. And Adrian, I'm going to lean on you for part of this. But let's talk about more of the technologies and principles that Damien articulated earlier. So just lead us through some of the basics of what TFH and Worldcoin Foundation are doing and how that's being accomplished.
Sure. And I thought Damien touched on it really nicely in the first point that he raised, which was a lot of this is about math. And I'll talk through some of the high level things that we're doing with cryptography with the lowercase c to help make sure that we're able to provide privacy here. So where to start? One thing that I like to touch on early is often when people think about security, they think about locking things down, right? They think about hiding things. They think about putting it someplace that no one can find. And while that serves a purpose for certain things, when it comes to designing a secure system, you have to start from exactly the opposite perspective. Our goal as we're designing the protocol, as we're helping design key use cases, as we're thinking through how applications are going to connect to Worldcoins, is to have everything that we're doing be as open and transparent as we can. And so some of that is just straight up using open source. Things like the orb have been released with the full bill of materials describing what the hardware looks like, how we're sourcing that hardware, how we're doing provisioning of it. We've released the vast majority of the actual software that runs on the orb as open source. We've made as much open as we possibly can. And when I say as we possibly can, there are some very small things that need to be kept secret, and I'm happy to talk about why. And then there are some things where we just haven't gotten to making it open yet, and we're working on making that open. So you can expect that in coming days, weeks, months, and years, more and more of what it is that we've designed is open. And that's part of trying to make it easy for other parties to understand how we're approaching security and privacy. It's also part of making it easier for other parties to potentially build their own implementation. I'm a huge fan of decentralization and making it possible for as many people as possible to build and connect into the protocol. So that's something that we're working on. We open sourced not just the technology, but also how we're thinking about it. So we have third parties come and do security reviews. We make those audits available. We have a bug bounty from a security standpoint. All of this is just about making it possible to have as many different people providing feedback on how it is that it's being built and making sure that it provides the level of trust that they expect. So that's a little bit on process. The technologies, there are a few of them that are really critical. I think the first one is what's called a zero knowledge proof. And the basic idea of a zero knowledge proof is that you can hold a private key and you can use that private key to confirm that something without giving away what it is that, and in our use of zero knowledge proofs, what we've specifically done is made it possible for a user to go interact with an orb. The orb confirms that they're human. And they're able to then use a zero knowledge proof with any other application or website that would like to know that they're human and not know anything else. And in particular, they won't know what other applications that user has used. They won't know any of the biometric data that was associated with how they were determined to be human. Only thing they will know is that they're human. And similarly, that zero knowledge proof protects the other side of the interaction, which is that Worldcoin won't know which applications the user is using. So there's a bit of symmetry there in terms of the privacy that's really important and fundamentally different from the way that most other services work. Because most other services, in order to get a credential, you have to give away what that credential is going to be used for, right? And so when you click on the login with other service provider ID, whether it be Apple or Google or Microsoft or whatever, they know which applications you're using. And that's by design. There's lots of reasons why that is implemented that way, but it's exactly the opposite of how it is that we've designed Worldcoin. So Worldcoin doesn't have any visibility into which applications a user is using. Those applications don't have visibility into the other applications, and they also don't have any visibility into the underlying credential. And that's what zero knowledge proofs give us, is the ability to have those privacy promises in both directions. There's another element to the system where we've been the word innovation gets thrown around a lot, so I hate to use it, but we're doing something that very few other people have actually figured out how to do. And this is what's called secure multi-party compute. And we're doing it at very large scale. And what we've basically done is realize that we want to be able to answer a question about some of the biometric data. We specifically want to answer, is this a unique person? But we don't want to be able to answer any other question. We don't want to be able to look at the biometric data. We don't want to be able to ask arbitrary questions. We really want to just answer that one. And that system can be designed in such a way using what's called secure multi-party compute so that it's possible to answer that one question. And so we designed the system so that it can only answer that one question. And then in particular, what we did is using cryptography, using math, broke the data into pieces so that multiple different parties, that's the multi-party part of secure multi-party compute, hold the data. And I've been struggling to try to figure out what a good analogy is for how to describe how secure multi-party computation works. So let me know if this analogy works for people. But a lot of times you think about breaking up a cake. And one way to break up a cake is to cut it into slices. And then each party has one slice. But secure multi-party compute doesn't work that way. It doesn't break it into multiple different pieces and give pieces to the different parties. It's more like decomposing it into the ingredients in a recipe. And so it's only if you have the multiple different parties collaborating to answer the one question, which is this a person that we've seen before, you can get an answer. And so we've used secure multi-party compute and go into all the different details of it in another place, but we've used it as a way to make sure that the data is more secure, that we're not able to use the data for purposes that it's not intended, and to make sure that user privacy is being protected to the maximum extent possible. So a lot of work has gone into that, and pretty excited to see it being used in practical use case at scale that it's at this point. So those are some of the things that we've been doing from a security standpoint, but I'll open it up and we can talk more. Sorry.
No worries. You were losing me at the cake analogy, but you redeemed yourself with the ingredient part. You can hold the ingredients and you still have no idea what you're making here. You just know you're participating in some recipe randomly. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, that was great, actually. So let's move on to Face Auth, which I want to hear from Chris, because Chris has been a little bit quiet, and Chris was just instrumental in, and his team, great team that Chris has and everything. One of my most favorite things we rolled out in terms of what it does for World ID and its usage. So I'm just going to start with Chris and dive right in. Chris, you want to tell us what Face Auth is for those that might have missed the announcement?
Sounds good, yeah. So what is Face Auth? And I'd like to explain it by maybe first chiming in the life cycle of the user or a WLD user. And what happens first is, of course, the user needs to enroll or sign up. So in this case, the user needs to prove that he or she has not been seen before by the system, exactly the system that Adrian just described with the SMPC parties. And what the system is eventually doing is actually that it compares this new user, with all the existing users in the system and tries to find out whether there is a matching there. And of course, if this system of users is very large, you need crazy accuracy in your biometric solution that you have deployed there to not run into false matches or false non-matches. And that's why we actually need iris recognition. That's why we need specialized hardware like the orb. And that's why things are quite cumbersome when you do a enrollment. Now, that's basically when the user entered the system, where the user needs to go through such a one-to-N comparison. Later in the life cycle of such a user, usually a common question arises, which is whether this person that's currently holding this World ID is actually still the same person who created that World ID or that account. And this is where re-authentication comes into play. So this is exactly the point where the user needs to prove that he or she is still the same person as during the enrollment step. And that's a lot easier because it's not a one-to-N comparison, it's a one-to-one comparison, which means that we have a lot more room for errors, which means we do not need the super accurate iris modality, but we can also use the face of the user. That's sufficient in terms of its accuracy to build a reliable solution. That's why our re-authentication method is actually a face authentication method. That's why we call it Face Auth. And it happens to be that the orb is actually, during the enrollment, not just capturing the iris of the user, but it's also taking a face image of the user. It adds this face image to what we call a personal data custody package. It signs this package, which basically prevents any other person to change the underlying data in this package. It encrypts this package with a key from the user, sends this package to the phone of the user, and then deletes the package. And then what happens is that the user, as soon as his or her phone receives this package, can decrypt it and can use those images for whatever reason. Two quick side notes on that. Only the user can decrypt it because only the user holds the private key corresponding to the public key the package was encrypted with. But the user cannot change the package or cannot change the content of the data in the package, in particular also not the image in that package of the user's face because it's signed by an orb. And now the user has this image, and what the user can now simply do, the user can take a selfie of him or herself, and then the app compares the selfie with the image that actually was captured by the orb during time of enrollment. And by that, the user can actually prove to any relying party that he or she is still the same person as during the time of the enrollment, which is one of the core primitives of an identity solution, which is the three authentication, which is in our case a face authentication. Does this answer the question, Stephen?
I think so. And I mean, you definitely, it's a phenomenal feature. And even zooming out, to me, the thing that's resonated with the people I've chatted with about it is essentially Face Auth is ensuring that the person using World ID is the person that was in front of the orb. It's making sure it's the same person. So it's secure for you as the owner of a World ID. And it's just a phenomenal feature. The other thing I think is key that really resonates with people, and you were describing personal custody package and everything, is the comparison. I mean, that occurs totally on the user's device. It's not a back-end comparison that we do or anything like that. It's just totally on the user device. So yeah, phenomenal feature. Yeah.
What I want to add here, it does not just protect the user. Of course, it protects the user against account theft, but it also protects the relying parties against fraudulent users who took actions in some account trading actions. So it's good for both.
I mean, exactly. You can ensure that, that if you have a service leveraging World ID, that it is it's an incredibly authentic use of World ID in that sense, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for that. Well, look, let's move on to audience questions. So We've got a couple. If you have any others you want to get in, just get those in quickly and we'll address as many as we can. First question is that we have, it looks like, how does WorldCoin plan to address privacy concerns, especially with the rise of AI-driven data collection? So yeah, I'll toss that one out. Maybe Damien, you want to take that one?
Sure, I can give it a crack. Marcin should obviously should chime in here too. I think this relates a little bit to what I said earlier on, which is there is this unusual paradox in that in the world of online and digital services, we share more data, which makes us a greater target for abuse or faking by AI or other mechanisms. And so I think how we seek to address that is by providing a means and a mechanism for you to be able to prove you're human, to build trusting online transactions, but without sharing data about yourself. So you can remain anonymous. And I think that that's fundamentally how to think about this. How do we prove that we're human, build trust, but keep our privacy and only share what we need to share?
All right, very good. Marcin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just can only second what Damien said. And I think that having privacy as a principle is the main, I would say, trajectory that should be done here. And with the principles that we're adopting, we're on it.
All right, very good. Let's see. Next question. Yeah, it actually relates, Chris, to Face Auth. Question on how is Face Auth different than what people might know as Face ID, that might be an Apple user, for example, that use Face ID for different apps?
Sure. I think it's similar in one case where both of these algorithm or methods compared two facial images that have been taken during different times. But where it's really where the difference is in the enrollment image that is being used. And for everyone having an iPhone, if you remember setting up this iPhone, you need to twist your head in some weird way. And this was exactly the point where the enrollment image has been taken. And for Apple's Face ID, basically the enrollment image is taken on that phone, and later the face authentication also happens on the same phone. Now, in our case, in our WorldID Face Auth case, it's a bit different because the enrollment image, the image you always get compared to, is not taken by your phone, but it's taken by a very secure hardware device, which is the orb. So in that sense, there's a crucial difference because we use a specialized device for biometrics, and which is very secure. For the enrollment image, it makes it way harder to spoof. And the other obvious difference is that we're platform agnostic. Of course, like Apple's Face ID only works on an iOS and on iPhones. Face Auth for WorldID also works on Android.
All right, excellent.
Can I ask one question? I'm not an Apple user. Does Apple actually claim that it checks whether the image is a human when you do enrollment? Or like, could I enroll my dog as my Face ID?
I'm not sure like if it's really checked. I don't think so, but they take a 3D point cloud of your face. So as long as you get a mask, which is quite the same as a typical human face, I think it would work, but we have never tested it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That humanness is not even a thing that they, as far as I know, claimed.
I think it's also not part of their use case to just unlock the phone, right?
With a pet, right? But Adrian, if you want to test it for us, I'll help you get a phone.
It's yeah, thank you.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, a couple more questions, and then we're gonna wrap. So here's a good one. It says, and it's a little bit longer, so I'm gonna read it just as it's written. It says, in light of recent events related to data violations in South Korea, what legislative changes do you think should be implemented to ensure better protection of personal data in the age of artificial intelligence? And how can these changes help enhance trust between users and companies? Which is a great question. I want to let anyone chime in on that wants to answer.
I'll take a crack at it, Stephen. So this is a really good question, and I think there's three pieces to this. So the first is obviously with respect to Korea. So obviously we had an investigation in Korea. We worked hand in glove with the Korean authorities, which was really a welcome exchange over the last several months. And I think we reached a resolution that reflects that the product and services that we're operating in Korea do meet the Korean data protection legal requirements. And so we were pleased to get to that outcome. Then the second part of this gets to the underlying first part, which is, I think it is critical to the success of privacy enhancing technologies that regulators take the time to understand how they work. And so in certain parts of the world where there's an awful lot of regulation, so the EU, and I'm a European, I'm originally from Ireland, there's been an increasing wave of regulation to protect consumers and citizens and users, which makes a ton of sense in terms of the objective. The challenge is some of these regulations are being interpreted in ways that are actually potentially harmful or not helpful to the underlying goals. So a really good example of this would be under GDPR, the idea is that personal data is protected. So if I share my name or my email address or other personal data, personal information with the service, I have certain rights as to that data. And that's great. It's easy. I should be able to delete it. I should be able to request changes to it. I should be able to port it to other services. But what we've tried to do is we have tried to avail of something that exists under all these laws, which is to anonymize the data so that it's no longer personal data, which is actually like the best privacy protection you can have. But what's unusual is that regulators are not taking the time to understand these technologies, right? Because they're really complicated. And instead, what they're doing is they're rushing to like sort of their simple answers based on things that they've done over the last 5 or 10 years. And the challenge with that is it runs the risk of actually putting us in positions where companies and services that are trying to do the right thing are going to be forced to collect more data. So it's a paradox, right? If I am required to provide you services to delete your data, to port your data, I have to collect more data about you to do that. And so the prompt for me here for the question is really like, how do we get to a place where people understand these really important privacy enhancing technologies that can help humans in an AI world? And that's my ask to regulators, to really think about it before they just rush to judgments and conclusions.
All right, very good. A lot of it comes down to education, right? I mean, at the end of the day, foundation for legislators, regulators, people that work in the compliance area. Yeah.
And whenever you have new technology, it's normal. Every time there's been a new wave of technology, that's a cycle that has to happen. And we're in that period. And so it's important that people take that time to do that.
Right. Totally agree. All right, last question is one I'm actually going to answer. It says, when are you going to launch the Worldchain? Worldchain is, for those that may not know, is a layer 2 that we're launching. It's an optimistic roll-up based on OP Stack and part of the Optimism Superchain. We are currently in a phase with that rollout we call developer preview, which means if you want to integrate, you want to deploy your app on the Worldchain, you contact us through the means we put out, let us know, we work with you and get you onboarded and get everything working. The answer to the question specifically, when are we going to launch? We're in the final stages of onboarding what we consider the set of partners that we want to have fully tested and deployed at launch. So we're doing that now. We're in the long tail of those. So I can't give you a specific date, but I will tell you it will be relatively soon. And now that was the last question. So I'm glad I got to answer one. But at any rate, I want to thank everyone that joined, that listened to the space live. I want to thank those that might listen to the recording a little bit later on. And then, of course, I want to thank our great group on the call with me as well. Damien, Adrian, Marcin, and Chris, experts in what they do. So it's just phenomenal to be able to have a conversation with them. And these are literally my favorite type conversations. Like we would have these sitting around a lunch table or conference room table or whatever. But anyway, again, thanks everyone for your time today. Really enjoyed it and hope you have a good rest of the day.